Good morning, Morai, Rabotai, Bruchim, Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we are on Daf Chaf Dalet, Amud Aleph. We did the Mishnah on the very bottom of the Amud. We're going to go over it quickly. Be'ez Hashem. Today's Amud is being learned as Zechut Rufah Shelema for Rachel Simcha Bad Nahid, Daniel Moshe ben Frangis v'Avraham, Yamin Bad Rina, Kayla Bad Nazi, Sikalit Bad Yafa, Levi HaLevi ben Leah, that should all have Refuah Shelema betoch shar chole Yisrael. Amen. His Amud is also being dedicated le Aliyat Neshama of Shahin Esther bat Yehuda and her of Ezra David Halevi ben Raftali, Rav Moshe Yisrael ben Rav Binyamin, the Neshamot Shulan Aliyah. And this month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family. It should be an ultimate zchut for the mishpacha. Amen. So this started a very famous Mishnah that Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, who was also the Rosh Bedin. He had different models of Levana that he kept in his attic up there, and when the Edim would come, he actually would show them when regular laymen who were not sophisticated would come. He would say, did you see like this? Did you see like this? The pictures of Levana and different manifestations that you could have in Shamayim is what he showed people in order to visually make it more tangible and understandable for them what's being talked about. And they'll say, oh, I saw like this, I saw like that, and then he would know how to examine and cross-examine the Edim together. And it sounds like a very beautiful idea, sounds like an innocent idea. And the Gemara says, that's beautiful, but how is it mutar for him to do that? We know that there is halacha, that you cannot make pictures or images, models or statues of anything that is up above, or anything that is considered Shamashe Elyon, the Malachim, and so on and so forth. You cannot make, and we explained that Rambam actually elaborates on this in the beginning of Hilchot Avodah Zarah, how the entire movement of the Avodah Zarah really initially started from the respect that they wanted to give to Hashem through respecting the Shamashe Elyon. This was parenthetically, the philosophers of yesteryear, they used to believe that the celestial beings, Shemesh, Yareach, Kochavim, they actually have Chokhmah, they are wise, they have wisdom that is greater than that of human beings. This is written in many of the medieval philosophers even, and this made its way even to the Jewish literature, not only the ones who were considered more as rationalistics, like the Rambam, but even those who were opposing that opinion in general, like the Rashba, even he makes it through their writing. But be as it may, you could understand how thousands of years before, people would attribute that these are Meshameshe Elyon in a way that power has been given to them and so on and so forth. They started respecting Hashem through this, and then the next generation writes the Rambam, they just forgot about what's behind it, and they stuck to the tangible, visible things that were mentioned and were served and were present in the temples and so on and so forth. And hence the start of the movement of the Avodah Zarah, of the Shemesh, Ve'areach, Kochavim, Mazalot. When we say Akum, right? When we say Akum, it's of the Kochavim Umazalot, right? The people would actually serve the stars and the galaxies and constellations and so on and so forth. That by itself became also a problem at some point historically. So you see, if you go through the history, at some point there was changed from Akum to Nochri, right? Because whatever they said, the Goim, they say, oh, who says Akum stands for of the Kochavim Mazalot? Maybe it stands for instance, the Christian faith of the two names that are there, maybe it's Christus Miriam. That's the things where they changed it to Nochri. This is all part of not just the blood libels, but the persecution of Jewish communities throughout the ages. So therefore, this was kind of like changed at some point. But be as it may, back to our thing, the Gemara asks us, wait, this sounds very honest and innocent, but why is that mutter? Umi shari, v'haketiv lo ta'asun iti, lo ta'asun kidmut shamashai, that when the pasuk says, don't make with me Elokei zahav and Elokei kesef, well, Elokei kesef Elokei zahav lo ta'asu lachem, don't make deities of silver and gold. Why do you have to say iti? That's extra in the pasuk. It's coming to tell you, don't make kedemut shamashai, don't make any images of my servants. And here the Gemara is understanding that my servants, it's a reference also to the moon, because as one of the celestial beings, like one of the planets, not a planet really, it's a moon, right? But it actually be part of Shamashai Hamishameshinoti Amar Abaye Lo Asat Torah Shamashin Shefshar La'asot Kemotan. Abaye says no, that's not a blanket prohibition. That's only prohibiting things that you could make an actual model. Actual model means you are mimicking not just the way they look, but their size and their reality as well. Now, you can't make something the size of the moon, so therefore that should be mutter, right? That's the Abaye's answer. And he brings a Braita. He says, look, I'll show you how the Braita that explains this Isur skips the moon and the sun and the stars and sticks to things that are very much the tzura of what would be considered the servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in this term, it will be very Jewish and very frum. Anything that you had in the Beit HaMikdash, which is considered the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you cannot make a model of that in that size, says the Braita. Kedetanya. We learned the Braita, Lo ya'aseh adam bayit tavnit hechal. You cannot make a house which looks like the hechal of the Beit HaMikdash. That means the same size, the same height, the same width, the same dimensions. You cannot do that. Achsadra tavnit ulam, or achsadra that was the same size, shape, and form of the ulam of the Beit HaMikdash. Chaser, a courtyard, keneged azara, corresponding to the azara. Shulchan, a table, like the bread table, the offering table that was in the Kodesh, in the Mikdash. Keneged shulchan, and menorah, keneged menorah. And you cannot make something that is very, actually, applicable, is that you cannot make a menorah, the tzura of the menorah that we had in the Beit HaMikdash, and explains the Gemara. Aval oseh, but you could make a menorah shel chamisha that has 5 branches instead of 7. V'shel shisha, or he has 6 branches. V'shel shmona, or he has 8 branches, or 9, like 8 and 9 would be for the way we have it for Chanukah. All of that is mutar. V'shel shiva lo yaseh, but you can't do 7. Now this is obviously a problem, because you'll have some of these historic shuls in Rome and other places that I've seen the pictures of them, that they actually have up front, they have like 7 branch menorahs. That is a problem, right? So it says you cannot make a candelabra that's formatted after the candelabra of the Beit HaMikdash. And that is not just gold. You can't say, well, the one in the Beit HaMikdash was gold. I'm making something from metal, from any other metal. Says the Gemara, that also is asur. Why? Because the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash was lechatchila, obviously, supposed to be gold, but b'di'evet, if they didn't have gold, can you make it with silver? Yeah. Can you make it with other metals? Yeah, you could. Right, that's what they did in the time of Hashmonaim, when they took over the control of the Beit HaMikdash. Initially, they had nothing. The Jewish nation had nothing. The Ivanim had taken everything from the Beit HaMikdash, right? So what did they do? They made a menorah, whatever they made. And then afterwards, they upgraded, as the Gemara is going to discuss. Therefore, anything that could be used as the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, you cannot make that surah on a private manner. That would be included in this ban, in this prohibition, right? You cannot make a 7-branch menorah, even if you're making it from other metal.
Private.
Or public.
So how do we have a menorah in Yerushalayim that's a 7 candelabra sitting right in front of the four Rosh?
Is that 7 or 8?
Sitting enclosed in a glass.
That's a good question. Right? It's a good question. You cannot make, again, if you want to remember the Beit HaMikdash, it's one thing. But again, does it have to be the same size? Is that the same size as the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash? And all of that. And also, there's a fair amount of machloket between Rambam and others. Rambam, for instance, holds that the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash was like V-shapes coming out. The branches, not like a half a circle. And again, obviously, you have to deal with the Ark of Titus and the right Shah Titos. It depicts the Galut of Yerushalayim going to Rome with the booties that they brought, including the most famous one, which is the menorah. But also, if you if you're going to get into the details of that, if you actually make measurements of pure gold for that, which is depicted there, firstly would be way more than a kikar zahav, and secondly, it would not be stable. It would collapse, right? So, what exactly to make of all of these things? Obviously, that would be a side question, but a good question you're asking nevertheless. Says the Gemara, you cannot make something that would be depicting the process of the Beit HaMikdash. You cannot make lachem. So at least on a private manner, you for sure could not make it. Something to use even in your shuls and so on and so forth. That's for Beit HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, even made out of different metals. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afshal etz lo yaseh. Says even wooden one. Why? Because says Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda that in the time of Hashmonaim, when they took over, the Hashmonaim made it out of wood. Kederech shasu malchei bet Hashmonai. Amru lo, Chachamim told Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, you're making a mistake. Misham raya, you bring a raya from malchei Hashmonaim. It was not true. Shpudin shel barzel hayu. They made them very cheap. It was not wooden though. They made shpudin shel barzel. The structure of it was made out of iron, and on top of that, they covered it with tin, right? V'chipum bebas. And bas, what happens is tin. After a while, when it's exposed to air and oxygen and so on, it turns dark and it looks like wood from outside. Says that's why you thought it was wooden. It was not wooden. It was made out of metal. Why wasn't it wooden? Because you cannot make it wooden. The menorah Beit HaMikdash, but the evet could be any other metal, but metal. It can't be from wood. So therefore, if you want to make a wooden menorah, Chazak Baruch, that's not a problem, says Chachamim. Shiru asam shel kesef. When they became richer, when they took control, and now you had a proper malchut of Hashmonaim, and the Jews were sovereign, and so on and so forth. Then they became richer. They made it out of kesef. Chazru ve'eshiru. They became more established and more rich, and they went back to making a menorah out of gold. Says so. What are we suggesting so far? Abaye is suggesting, this was a whole braita, part of Abaye's argument. Abaye argued that the reason that Rabban Gamliel was allowed to have what he had was because it was not the real size. The only isur is when you're making something its size, like the ulam, the Beit HaMikdash, the menorah, the shulchan, all that, that's asur. Moon, mutar. Yeah, you're making a little circle, that's moon. Now, it's not representing the real size, it's mutar. The Gemara says, really? Is that mutar? The ones that you cannot make the real size is mutar. I found another brayta that's more explicit. Listen to this. Lo ta'asun iti. Lo ta'asun kedmut shamashai hamishamashin lefanai. One extra word. Bamarom. Don't make the tavnit, the model of my shamashim that they serve me up above. What is that? That sounds like the moon and the stars would be a problem. Amar Abaye argued back, no. Lo asla tola ela demut arba'a panim. In other words, the depiction of the Kisa Kavod in the Nevuah of Yechezkel HaNavi is that the base of the Kisa Kavod had 4 images on the 4 sides, right? Shor, Nesher, Ari, and Adam. So says Abaye, when he talks about Marom, he's not talking necessarily about even Malachim alone. It's only talking about if you make something that clearly is representing the Kisa Kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's Asur. But at the same time, moon, sun, all those things, Mutar. So we're sticking to Abaye's original drasha. You have the kasha that says Shamashai Hamashamashin Oti B'Marom. That's only a specific isur, not to make something that has these 4 images on the 4 sides. That would be asur. Says the Gemara. And Amata Parsuf Adam Lechudet Tishtri. So you're saying that the image of a human being alone would be mutar, right? Because Abaye, you're saying that if you make something that has all 4, like the dmut of what Yechezkel HaNavi was shown in his Nevuah, that's asur. But the image of a person alone would be mutar, right? You can't say that because I found another brayta. Alama Tanya, why did we learn in the brayta then? Kol parsufot mutarin. You could make any parsuf, any image you could make, chutz mi parsuf Adam. You cannot depict a parsuf of Adam. How do I know? Right? So you remember how we said there were Gdolim who refrained from being photographed? This is it, right? You cannot, says the Brayta, you cannot make parsuf of Adam. Why? A nuance is in this same drasha. Amar Avuna, Bred Rav Idi, mi pirket da Abaye, shmiali. I heard from the shiur that Abaye himself gave, lo ta'asun iti. Don't read it lo ta'asun iti, but lo ta'asun oti. Don't depict my image. Now, kaviyachol, obviously, as the pasuk itself says, ma demut ta'aruchu Hashem has no demut chas v'shalom, chalila v'chas. Right? Hashem has no physicality. Nothing up above has physicality. The malachim also don't have. They're not physical things with wings around, right? They're not. Malachim are energies, right? And you know, these are orot, and even or is not the proper language because even that is a physical thing that we could, quantify. It's just that the least tangible reality of our life is or, so we call them orot, right? But it's not even that. There's nothing that we know about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Lo machshavat tfisa b'klal, like we see in Patach in Zohar HaKadosh, a thought process of no human being, or even no malach, as the Gemara says in the beginning of Masechet Chagigah, could understand what Hashem is, where Hashem, there's nothing of that we know. So what does it mean? So Rabbeinu Hanan on the side of the Gemara over here, Ritba, the same thing, they all explain what he means is like this. We, just like Malachim, how do we know what Malachim are? Yeah, Malachim could, appear different ways. But the demut, the way they appear to our eyes, not our eyes, to the mar'en nevuah of the prophets, of the Nevi'im, is 2 wings, 4 wings, 6 wings, 8 wings. That's a tzura, like a human shape with wings. That's malachim. And says Rabbeinu Hananel, and says the Ritba basically the same thing, that in Mar'eh HaNevuah, many times HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears, depending on what the content of Nevuah is, like a ish zaken v'yoshev b'yeshiva, like the Ramchal explains, right? Like an elderly, a wise man, or like a gibor milchama, a young, strong warrior, right? These are Mar'eh Nevuah that the Nevi'im see depicting a message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving to that Navi at that point. And if you make any of that, with that reference, you're in transgression of this. So therefore, once Hashem appears in Mar'eh Nevuah in a form of human being, you cannot make a parsuf of human being. Now, you could talk further depth of Tselem and Okim, what does that mean, and all that, getting more mystical, but simple understanding is, anything that is mentioned in Mar'eh Nevuah of Nevi'im, you cannot make a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol. So says the Gemara, V'sha'ar shamashin mishari. So you're saying the human parsuf you cannot make, but the rest of the things are mutter. V'hatanya, we learn another braita, lo ta'asun iti, lo ta'asun kitmut shamashai hameshameshin lefanai b'marom. And this braita has an extra sentence. We found finally a braita that sounds like a full checkmate. This braita says, lo ta'asun iti means do not make a depiction, a picture, an image, a model, and a statue of anything that serves me up above. But not only up above, he gives examples. Kegon, ofanim usrafim v'chayot HaKodesh, u'malachei hasharet. Any form of malachim, and again, we already explained, because the psukim talk about the wings like this, the wings like that, you cannot make. Amar Abaye, so you see, it's not just the human parsuf, you cannot make the malachim either. Amar Abaye, lo asra Torah ela shamashim shemador ha'elyon. It says, no. That's only in the 7th level of Rakia, where the highest level of malachim are. That's what's asur, right? Because iti means with me. That's the highest level of shamayim. That's anything that's in that mador, that level of shamayim. It's asur because that is the understanding of iti with me. So obviously, we mentioned that you can't make the depiction of the Kisa Kavod, you can't make a human parsuf because oti, but also the lowest level of that is iti, what's with me, that means in the highest level of Shamayim, of the heavens, the Malachim, Ofarim, Sarafim, V'chayot HaKodesh. That's what's asur. But anything lower, right, like Shemesh, Yareach, that are in the second level of Shamayim, that will be mutar. So says the Gemara, V'shem Mador Atachton Mishari. Really? Things that are down below in the first levels of Shamayim that are mutar. V'atanya, I found another checkmate for you. The writer says it clearly. V'atanya asher b'shamayim. When he talks about not doing avodah zarah, it says, L'rabot chama v'levana. Asher b'shamayim is coming to add chama v'levana. It's the sun and the moon. Kochavim u'mazalot. The stars and the galaxies, the constellations. Mimal, and when it says Bashamayim Mimal, means L'rabot Malachei Hasharet. That's the higher Shamayims and Malachei Hasharet that you cannot serve. You can't do Avodah Zarah, right? The Gemara says that's exactly what you just said, to do Avodah Zarah. Kitanya ila ovdam. Right? There, we're talking about that you're not allowed to serve them. You're not allowed to do avodah to them. Right? You can't bring korbanot. You can't serve them. It's avodah zarah. The Gemara says, what? You need to tell me that I can't do avodah zarah to the sun and the moon. Hazaku baruch. Wow, only sun and the moon? A little worm in the ground? Can I make a little image of a worm and serve that? You need to be sun and the moon to be asur to serve them avodah zarah. Avodah zarah is anything, even the most insignificant thing like a worm. Says that's exactly what it is. Another Braita says a worm when talking about this pasuk. This pasuk is speaking about avodah zarah. Specifically, it's not talking about making images. It's talking about actual serving. And the Braita says it. Asher ba'ares l'rabot harim v'kvaot. It says b'shamayim mima'al, right? That's the celestial beings, the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations, and mima'al malachim. V'asher ba'ares mitachat. Says the Braita. Asher ba'ares is l'rabot to add harim v'kvaot, yamim v'naharot, afikim v'ge'aot. It's talking about the mountains and the hilltops and the valleys and the rivers and all that. And mitachat, when it says al haras mitachat, below the ground, it's coming to add l'rabot shel shul katan. They can't even make an image of a little worm if you're serving, right? Don't say, oh, that's not avodah zarah. Anything is avodah zarah if you make it to serve it. But making an image of it alone, it's mutar, right? That's the suggestion of the Gemara. The Gemara says, "V'asiya gereda mishari," just making it alone without bowing to it, without serving it, is mutar. Who says? V'atanya, I found another Braita. This is like a constant check. It has to be a thread that goes through all the Braitas, and it doesn't. V'atanya lo ta'asuniti. When it says the same pasuk we've been speaking the whole Amud about, lo ta'asun iti Elohei kesef ve'elohei zahav lo ta'asun lachem, lo ta'asun kedemut shamashai hameshameshin lefanai. Don't make like the shamashim that are serving in front of me. And this one says it finally. Kegon chama ve'levana kochavim umazalot. You can't make an image of chama, levana, kochavim, mazalot. It will be considered part of this issur. So back to our question. How in the world did Rabban, after one amud of going back and forth, how was it mutter for Rabban Gamliel to have models, images of the pictures of Levana to show when it's asur to make it? It's asur to make images, pictures of Chama v'Levana kochavim mazalot. Says the Gemara, Shani Rabban Gamliel Ta'achirim asur. So he didn't make it. Goy made it, right? He bought it on eBay, right? Goy made it for him, right? Veha Rav Yehuda Ta'achirim asur. But we know the story of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda, the student of Shmuel, he had a ring with an image on it. Ve'amar Shmuel, his Rabbi Shmuel told him, Shinina, the sharp one, Sami ene deden, erase it, like ruin the face of it. That means, erase the image that's on your tabat. Says the Gemara, Hatam chotamo bolet hava. There, the reason was because it was not just a 2D, was a 3D image, right? It had bumps. He was elevated, right? Umishum chashada, and it was because of chashad, because people see Rav Yehuda wearing this thing, and like, why does he have that? Maybe when no one is looking, he's gonna give it a kiss. Maybe he's, who knows, right? It happened to, bigger people than him before, right? Yochanan Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol for 80 years before he became Baitusi. It's a kofer, right? So, says the Gemara, and that's also a Braita. The Braita says it clearly. Kedatanya, we learned the Braita Tabat. If you have a ring, back in the day, the rings were also used as a seal, right? The way they would seal things would be pouring melted wax or things of that nature on anything they wanted to seal, and they had their stamp on the ring, basically, and they would stamp it with their name, whatever shape it was, and that would be a seal, right? So they have different ways of it. Sometimes the image on the ring would be indented, and then when they would put it, that would become 3D, right? It would be elevated. Sometimes this would be elevated, and that would go in, and so on, right? So says this Braita, it depends really. A chotam that you have, a stamp that you have, if it's bolet, if your stamp on your ring is elevated and it has 3D, 3 dimensions, then asur le'anicha, you can't put it on you because of chashad. Umutar lachatomba, but it is mutar to stamp with it, because the stamp you're going to make is going to be now depressed, right? It's going to be indented. Chotamo shokea, but if your stamp, your ring is indented, then mutar la'anicha, you could put it on your ring, you could put the ring on, ve'asur lachtom, but you can't make it you can't use it as a seal, because now the seal is going to be like that, elevated. Now the Gemara says, don't do it. That's exactly what it's saying, right? You either wear it or you use it. You can't have it both ways, right? The Gemara says, well, we can say, since when we are concerned about people thinking that Rav Yehuda is going to be doing avodah zarah and no one is looking. There was a Bet Knesset, was called Shaf V'Yativ, right? This Shaf V'Yativ apparently was the oldest shul in Bavel, that when Yechonia Melech Yehuda was taken to exile, people loved Eretz Yisrael, right? Kiratzu avadecha et avanea ve'et afara yechonenu. The pasuk says they took literally the stones of Yerushalayim, of Beit HaMikdash, and the dirt of Yerushalayim, and they took it to Bavel, and they used those stones and those dirt for the basis of this first shul that they built. It was called Shaf V'Yativ, because they took it Shaf from Eretz Yisrael, V'Yativ there, or others say it was destroyed once and it was rebuilt. But there it had a statue of the king there, and all these Gdolei Amoraim, Rav, Shmuel, Avod Shmuel, Levi, all of them went there, and one is going to ask from that. I just realized we're out of time, but I also will get to a discussion of, I remember this actually happened in my time, when the political party Shas was headed by Chacham Obadia. This is 23-4 years ago maybe, and in the Motzei Shabbat shiur that he had in the Yazdim, there was a picture, for those who remember, there was a picture of an advertisement of Shas, Harvadia's picture with Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri's picture, right? And this was slightly elevated, and someone in the middle of the shiur yelled to Chacham Obadia that this is Asur, what are you doing having that up there? And Chacham Obadia immediately put him in cherem in front of everyone, right? This became like a very big deal, and then he had to come apologize and so on and so forth. But what he was saying is, we just learned you can't have elevated images of human being, right? It's asur to make such a thing, and obviously Chacham Obadia felt that I would have thought about that if it was true. Obviously Chacham Obadia felt that it was mutter, and therefore he put him in cherem, right? Which brings us to the question, we're really late. It brings us to the question of how is it mutter to have coins, right? Coins have an image of a human being on them, which is actually elevated, right? So we have to get to really see. Maybe nobody should use coins today for tzedakah until we get through this. I'm just joking. Through this sugya, B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow together. Zaku Baruch.